This is the WGBH Forum Network.
The Creative Method. The National Association of Educational Broadcasters presents Richard Tucker on singing. Here first is Lyman Bryson.
In what sense is an opera singer, even a great opera singer, a creative artist? Is he any more than an interpreter of another man's music? If he has a fine voice, a warm temperament, what more does any singer need? Mr. Richard Tucker and Mr. Bill Cavness talked over what it is that an opera singer creates.
There is definitely a difference between creative and interpretive activities. For myself, I can only say that as an artist, there is a tendency to first interpret the role and then to create something that you may feel that the composer wanted to bring out to portray for the audiences.
You're listening to Richard Tucker on singing. The Creative Method. The singer as creator. One of 10 conversations with creative Americans about the nature of their work. The Creative Method, prepared by WGBH-FM in Boston under a grant from the National Educational Television and Radio Center. Later, we'll tell you how you may obtain excerpts from this and 21 other radio essays on the creative process in American arts, sciences, and professions. But now, Richard Tucker on singing. And here is Bill Cavness.
Do you, in preparing an operatic role for the Metropolitan or for any other company for that matter, approach the preparation of the role by submerging your own personality, or do you make the role itself fit your personality?
No, I don't think so. I get around to tackling the situation by first studying the contents of the role, the character, and I don't think it has anything to do with my own personality. Him to create as much or interpret the role which they think suited for themselves.
I was reading just the other day an interview with your colleague Alessio de Paulus, in which he said that he completely forgot himself when he was building one of his famous character roles.
Yes, there are moments I can agree with him very much, because there are many moments in singing on the stage of the Metropolitan Opera or any other opera house where one is perhaps moved that they are, just as we say in musical terms, taken out of this world and put into the era or in time of the opera.
And become the character that they're portraying.
And become the character that they are portraying, that's true.
Can we say that there is a strongly creative aspect to the interpreter's role, particularly in the field of opera, in that every performer's interpretation is a little bit different?
Oh, yes, definitely there is.
So you are creating something essentially new in a way.
That's correct. I don't, and I have not ever been, shall we say, dubbed. I use the word dubbed as a copyist, because we have always a legend, shall we say, or a Bible, which we call in our operatic field of music, by which we always can go back and look up as a dictionary that person's interpretation or that person's creative method of singing that particular role or aria or whatever have you. But I never have been told that you perhaps look like Caruso, but you don't act like Caruso or Gigli or great other tenors before me. That is something that I have always kept away from, because I feel that today, with the advent of so many fine directors, which Mr. Bing from the Metropolitan has brought in from all over the world, each person has their own different creative and interpretive measures.
You've worked most recently, as I understand it, with Jose Quintero.
Yes, and I haven't worked with him yet, but I know him, and I've seen the production of Cavalleria Rusticana. And in fact, they were very disappointed that I couldn't do it this season, but I'm hoping to do it on tour this coming spring and, of course, next season. But I have had the pleasure to work with many, many fine directors, such as Tyrone Guthrie, Alfred Lunt.
That was the Così fan tutte, wasn't
Così
it?
fan tutte, that's correct. Garson Kanin, Joseph Mankiewicz, and...
That was Bohème, as I remember.
Yes, many new productions which Mr. Bing has brought in, and each one has their own different method. Yet, as I have always agreed with them, I hate the word tradition, because I don't think that is progressive in this era.
Do you think that there is a peculiar aspect of personality that most singers have in common? Do singers have a personality trait in common that makes them become singers?
I think that grows, such as the word maturity, on a person, because I don't think when you meet a young singer or a young person on the stage, you can more or less feel by hearing them or seeing them perform on stage that they have some material which is starting to just blossom out. So what we actually see is the bud. And it's very difficult to say of a young person that they are great. I don't believe that, and I never will. It is just like dramatic tenors are never born. We have to mature.
They physically and emotionally mature.
Both, of course.
Of course, the voice does continue to grow, doesn't it?
That's correct, if properly used. And of course, unfortunately, not many do that.
Can you give us an example or two of exactly how you go about preparing a role, creating an effective operatic performance on stage? What are the tools that you use?
Well, firstly, I study the role musically. And when I know it musically, I reread the story as far as the meanings of the word, what the composer intended for that character, and what his part is, what part that character is played in the opera, how essential it is in proper scenes, in certain scenes, to create a different atmosphere, a change. It is not always love and amour. Sometimes it is bitterness. Sometimes it is mellowness. One has to study these things, because if you sing something fortissimo from beginning to end, the public will not be in their seats when you're through, because one does not go for too much, as we call fortissimo gusto, for 3 hours. One must be mellow also, unless it's a very, very dramatic, and I don't know any dramatic roles that have been dramatic in the sense from cover to cover. There is always a woman in the case, thank God. And with that, which brings out the sweetness, and love scenes, and love duets. So after reading and getting the meaning from which the composer meant, I then go about restudying musically the role, finding out where the pianos are and the mellowness and the forte of that role is. When I have that under my belt, I then go to a director who reads with me the synopsis of the opera. And we take each scene and in that way sort of walk our way through, just like a baby walks, a young man, person going to grammar school. Mm-hmm. One does not eat steak. We all start with cereal.
And learn step by step that way.
Correct.
You mentioned learning exactly what the composer intended with the role. Now, supposing you're creating a role in an opera by a composer who has been dead for a long time, Mozart, for example. You've got tempo markings, you've got dynamic markings in the score, but these are only approximate. How much of your own creativity comes into the realizing of this music? How far do you have to interpret these markings?
I don't think there's any end to which one can interpret these markings, and of course I don't see these markings. I get them from the conductor of the opera, who tells me that he has read in the operatic conductor score that there have been certain markings made by his predecessors. Let us say, let us take an opera today which I sing under the baton of Dmitri Mitropoulos or Fausto Claver. Well, Mitropoulos, as you know, doesn't go by the markings of his predecessors at the Metropolitan Opera.
He restudies the score
restudies himself, you see. And we often have discussions, and I will say there have been many moments where singers and conductors do not agree, because only this has come about in the last 20, 30 years. Because as one can listen to recordings today, by which they are our best medium, the tempos and the tempis which are used on the recordings, comparatively with today's recordings, don't belong in the same league.
And that would go, too, for interpolations or for elaborations of the score itself. We know that, for example, that a couple of generations back, it was considered perfectly legitimate to ornament a vocal line, whereas few people do it today. Isn't that true?
That's true, but never get away from the fact that the interpreter of that role, regardless of today or 50 years ago, was basically the same. By that I mean, today, with the new advent of directors from all theaters, which are being brought into operas, and which makes it a wider scope, because one man's thinking is not enough. It's always good to bring in different people to get their ideas of the theater. And basically, as I said, the fundamental interpretation of the role is the same, but only new injections are made to make it more, shall we say, modernized.
Let me get off onto another subject just briefly and explore it with you. You've been known to say that a real essential for a singer or for any creative person is a time of quiet and relaxation, and even more specifically, finding himself in a church. Do you find, I know that you do a great deal of singing of religious music, do you find that this using music as an expression of your own spiritual convictions tends to express you as a personality?
Yes, I think that goes a long way towards being the singer that I am today, with the, shall I say, the proper and the creative musical background which I was fortunate enough to have, which helps any singer. By that, I mean starting to sing as a boy in a choir at the age of 6, through the years being kept close to music has put me in a frame of mind where, as one psychiatrist friend of mine said to me, it is remarkable how you can turn the faucet off your mind. I said, yes, doctor, and asked me many times to visit his offices so that he can put it down in notes to give, to present as a lecture, because he had never met an artist, as myself, or any other artist for that matter, that after he has visited me in my dressing room at the Metropolitan after a performance, and looking at me, and seeing how spent and tired I am, and yet meeting me across the street for a little, just shall we say, collation, an hour later, completely relaxed and talking about everything but music.
That's quite an accomplishment. That's something that I'm quite sure a good many of your colleagues envy you for.
They do.
Because it's
they
different.
Do.
But you would feel then that using your voice, your music, for a specifically religious expression has in turn added to your own stature musically.
Yes, it has. Definitely it has. And I am always trying to convince young people today who are seeking careers in music to get closer to religious music, to get closer to choral music, to associate themselves with anything that pertains to music, because I feel it will only broaden and widen their scope and feelings about music, so that when they transpose themselves, or shall we say put themselves into the field of opera, they will find that everything has a tendency to bring themselves closer to the interpretation of a role, and will find that their religious ties, when I say religious, a person doesn't have to be necessarily orthodox in their feelings or religious, that they observe everything to the letter, but just by being, taking a moment or two or an evening going to listen to secular music will bring them sort of a calmness, and especially for singers, I have often heard my colleagues, men like Lawrence Tibbett and other musical people, who are now sort of semi-retired from the field of singing.
Tibbett started as a choir singer, didn't he?
That's true. Eddie Johnson the same way. Sang in a choir over in Newark. And they have always said to me, Richard, we have never feared at any moment that you would be the nervous type because you have been associated with a temple, a synagogue, and when you have to sing for people to lead them in prayer for religion, that is much, much more difficult than singing on the operatic stage. Although it's a different interpretive and creative role, but we felt that with 2 feet on the ground, you sort of have an advantage over the person who is entirely new and who is just trying to break in the field of music. You at least have, shall we say, like we say here in Brooklyn, 2 strikes. You haven't got the 2 strikes. You have 2 balls or 3 balls before you take a walk to first base. I use that term in baseball because it means it's so much advantageous for any singer to get themselves really affiliated with any musical organization, because basically they will find as the years go ahead that when they start singing with conductors as great as Metropolis or Fausto Claver, as have I had the privilege to sing with the great and revered Toscanini, basically they found immediately that musically speaking, I was on the ball, and only because of my youth that I attended choral organizations, sang with choruses, sang in temple choirs, sang with other choirs like the Schola Cantorum, choruses like that, Westminster chorus, that you get a basic training, and that would never go in vain.
You say that singing in a temple, in a synagogue, is more difficult than singing on the operatic stage. Why would it be more difficult? Is this because it is a more direct expression of your own emotions?
That's correct. And
you don't have the artificiality of the stage.
There is more secular music being printed, but years ago it was more ad lib. In other words, it was more of the creative of the cantor singing and chanting how he felt, and how he felt he put into his prayers. And those prayers were related to the people attending the service. And they knew, naturally as anyone would, regardless it be Jew or Gentile or Protestant or Catholic or any religion, is all the same basically. Because when you go into a place of worship and you hear something which is a beautiful melody or one with pangs of cry, you get to feel that emotion immediately.
And you have to communicate it
immediately. Of course.
Can you tell us briefly the sort of training and the discipline that is necessary to produce a creative artist on the operatic stage? We've touched on some of the aspects. I know you've mentioned singing in various groups.
To make a quick summation, I will say, as far as singers, American singers, are concerned, it is a dedicated career just like one would want to become a doctor or lawyer. That person has to study and give of themselves on an average of 4 to 5 hours daily. And if they think that they are just doing it sort of haphazard, I would tell them immediately not to waste their time and money, because it just takes the twitch of someone's nose and you're turned off the air. I use that phrase only because I remember when I was taken out to Hollywood for the Westinghouse program right after my debut in 1945, the producer of that show mentioned this phrase, and I never forgot it. And it only strengthened, as the years went on, my desires for perfection. And many people know that I am a perfectionist in anything I do, because either I put my heart and soul into it 100% or I don't do it at all. And for that reason, I guess that shows up the success of a person, because that's the public. The public has every right to criticize and deny your ascension.
Your search for perfection would indicate to me then that you believe that one never stops learning.
Never.
Never stops even training oneself.
Never at all. Training today, to me, is as essential as getting up in the morning and having my orange juice.
In extending advice to young people who have in mind preparing themselves for careers as musicians, as singers specifically, what would you have to say about the choice between training in this country and European training?
Well, I think Mr. Bing of the Metropolitan answered that was about 2 years ago, as he's always in search of talent. And also, I am always auditioning young singers on my concert tours throughout the country. I always take the time off when someone writes me and tell them that I'll be in that particular city to contact me at this studio or at a hotel where we go down and get a piano. And I try to give them as much advice as I can for that moment. Personally, I agree with Mr. Bing. One, that the best talent in the world is right here in America. And that's a broad statement to make, because when you speak of opera, you think immediately of the mother country, Italy. As far as study is concerned, unfortunately, and I quote from a great maestro and a very revered friend, Maestro Tullio Serafin, that the young singers of Italy are not taking too much time to study, and that, he says, is only because they have been going through such a very hard economic period after the war, and immediately if they learn a role or two, they go out and sing for a couple of 1,000 liras for bread to eat. And for that reason, we must have patience. Here in America, the young singer has so much advantages over the European, because there are so many avenues open to them where one can study. But the only drawback in America, as far as stage is concerned, is that there are enough opera houses in America by which a singer can try out their footing on the stage. And that is the reason why we have the Fulbright scholarships today. Senator Fulbright always comes to my dressing room at the Metropolitan asking me to participate in the search for American talent and to give the go-ahead sign in the exchange programs. But I've had to decline because of my busy schedule, and I will not have my name put on a piece of paper as a member of a committee unless I myself can give my...
Unless you can really be active.
Be there and active, of course. I don't believe in having on a shower on a person if he doesn't participate. And number two, I think that the time will come, as I have seen in many, many leading universities of our land, that opera troupes and opera classes are being created. And I'm very happy to mention just a few. The Indiana University. And
7 or 8 major opera productions a year, isn't it?
Oh, it's terrific there. I've always said to President Harry Wells, this is one thing, one baby, as I call it, when I sing there every spring tour, that he can really be proud of, because he has a wonderful man at the head of his music department,
Dean Wilfred Bain.
Bain, who's a personal friend of mine, and under the tutelage of many opera singers at the Metropolitan who give it their time and efforts. And that's only one university. The other one was University of Minnesota, and just to name a few. So therefore, the trend is going, it's on the up, instead of, God forbid, on the decline, because many, many young American people have taken to classical music. And that is because of only the medium of records or metropolitan broadcasts. So you see that the barometer is showing that we are on the upward trend. And I would advise any young person who wishes to study for a career that the chances here in America are very, very favorable.
And getting better.
And getting better.
Is your own training American, or did you study in Italy too?
No. I'm what we call a full-fledged American. By that I mean I was born in Brooklyn, trained in Brooklyn, and made my debut at New York Metropolitan Opera House. I am rare, like they say in musical circles, because one really has to go out and look for records of people who have made their debuts at the Metropolitan without singing in small provinces, or sang in Italy, running around Europe I am rare in that sense, because Edward Johnson took me right out of the synagogue and put me right into the Metropolitan Opera, because he had that confidence in me.
Yes.
And, of course, I will pay my respects, of course, to my teacher, who has passed on, rest his soul, Paul Althaus, who was the former Wagnerian tenor.
Oh, yes, he was a very great singer.
Oh, yes. Paul and I were like father and son, and I studied with him for 13 years. And he wouldn't let me just walk wrong, because that's the way he felt about me. The day will come. And, of course, there are many other people, like Emil Cooper and Wilfred Pelletier, who have guided me, and I'm very, very grateful. But, again, in closing, I will say that the young American singer, the person who wishes to make the opera field his career or her career, do not be afraid. Just come forward, and with courage and conviction, you cannot fail.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tucker.
Richard Tucker on singing. And here again is our host and commentator for the creative method, Lyman Bryson.
When Mr. Tucker says that there are many fine young voices in America, and that a voice in America has a chance, that a singer has a chance, if he wants to do what it's necessary to do in order to be really worth a hearing at some place like the Metropolitan Opera House, his own example makes his words especially weighty and reassuring, because, as he told you, he started in the synagogue and he went to the Metropolitan Opera House without any of the long travail which so many young singers have to go through. Mr. Tucker, however, went back to this question of interpretation and creation, and I think it's important to note that, as he describes it, the difference between merely interpreting a role and creating a role is a matter of depth, a matter of artistic commitment, a matter of study, a matter of knowing what it is you're doing and of being able to throw yourself into the role that you're creating with enough vigor and warmth to make it live. Here again, and like so many others, Mr. Tucker warns that the talented young person can't go on talent and spontaneity alone. Here or wherever, a young person expects to get a start. He must have his general education. He must have his musical education. He must have his hard, rigorous training. And he must be willing to give himself wholly and devotedly to the art if he expects that singing is going to be one of the great creative actions. And, of course, if he has the chance, which Mr. Tucker thinks he will have, then he has to have, as Mr. Tucker says, courage and conviction to stay by it until the chance develops. Next week, another distinguished musician will be our guest. Mr. Leopold Stokowski will talk over with me the problems of the orchestra conductor.
Thank you, Dr. Bryson. You've heard Richard Tucker, the singer, as creator. One of 10 conversations furthering our understanding of creativeness in American arts and professions. The creative method is recorded by WGBH-FM in Boston under a grant from the National Educational Television and Radio Center. Producer Jack D. Summerfield with Lorland Thatcher and Bill Cavness as production associates.
This is the National Educational Radio Network.